Let's look now at the performance splits from Rory McIlroy, the major championships beginning in 2007. We first saw Rory show up with that mop top, curly hair at Carnoustie. You knew he was going to be good. 25 starts up until 2014. And by the way, his last major title came at the PGA Championship that year at Valhalla. He won 4. I remember Jack Nicklaus saying at the time he thought Rory could win 15. From 15 to 23, so it's 8+ seasons. We're at 31 majors without a win. Higher top 10 percentage, but he's not after top 10s. What do you suppose Tiger shared with him with respect to the golf swing? And I thought that was really a fascinating interview.
It was a great interview with Kira. Look, first of all, who would turn down a conversation with Tiger Woods, arguably the greatest player of all time, but I would argue perhaps the most knowledgeable person about the golf swing on the planet. You know, he's worked with 4 different teachers. He's changed his golf swing completely and successfully 4 different times. He's come full circle back to his golf swing. So it wouldn't surprise me. You know, look, it looked to me like Rory had gotten too far away from the ball, gotten too flat. He talked about being perhaps too open at the top. I think Rory alluded to that yesterday. But just real quick as it relates to winning a major championship. Yeah, he hasn't won a major championship in some time, but I would argue he's done something far more important than winning a major championship. He was a major force in reshaping the PGA Tour and played a major role in encouraging players to stick for principle and legacy and not leave for narcissistic greed. That has far-reaching implications as opposed to major championships, which are interesting and fun to talk about, but he has been a tremendous influence to his peers. Now, beyond that, I would say in just looking at what he's done over the course of this year, when you take it in its totality, it reminds me a lot of what happened with Jon Rahm last year, where he was a little bit off early in the year and he kept saying, you guys got it all wrong. I'm fine. I'm fine. The ebb and flow of the game is going to turn things around. And I know people looked at what he did at the Wells Fargo and said he didn't hit the ball particularly well. But the Wells Fargo was an anomaly because by and large this year, he's hit the ball almost exactly as well as he hit it last year. And the stats certainly bear that out. We'll take a look at what he's done this year in strokes gained off of the tee, approach, around the green. And you take a look down there, tee to green, right? Strokes gained, tee to green. Numerically, he may be, what, two positions worse, but in terms of raw numbers, he's actually gaining more strokes tee to green than he did last year. But if you look at the one number on this board that stands out, well, it's clear that what he did last year on the greens was the best he ever has done on the PGA Tour, and what he's doing right now is perhaps the worst he's ever done. If we look at this in more granular detail, you're going to begin to see why he hasn't played as well from 10 to 15 feet. You look at that, some 15% drop-off in his make percentage this year, and that's, generally speaking, where your birdie putts are going to come from, 15 to 20 feet. Again, almost a 15%, or right at a 15% drop-off from 15 to 20 feet. These are massive drop-offs. 20 to 25 feet, right at, what, 12% drop-off. And you don't make that many putts over 25 feet, but still, he made 3 times as many last year, roughly speaking, as he made this year. And if you look down at the bottom there, total distance of putts made. Last year, he was in the top 10. This year, he's almost dead last. Now, I would say you look at his stroke last year, you look at it this year, you can't find a dime's worth of difference, and sometimes it looks like to me he drags the handle just a little bit more than other times. I will say that if you look at great putters like Jason Day, 2016, who led and set the record in strokes gained putting, the fall off the very next year was about 3/4 of a stroke from Jason Day's best to worst. Same with Luke Donald when he was putting his best 2011 to 2016, about 3/4 of a stroke. Tiger Woods has had 3/4 of a stroke on year over year in strokes gained putting. Did their strokes look any different? Not one bit, not one dime's bit of difference. I would say be patient. He alluded to the fact that sometimes he gets a little bit impatient. Frustration will throw you out of focus. It will certainly throw you out of focus. So he needs to, I think, just be patient, not only with his golf swing, but with his putting stroke. It looked lovely last year. It looks lovely this year. But it's going to take some time, I think, to work his way through this, just like Jon Rahm did last year.
Just go ahead, Paul. You have something on his putting? Did you see anything with Rory's putting at all?
Yeah, I mean, look, I love what he's doing with Brad Faxon because I love the fact that it blends in with how he plays the game. It's not a technical approach that he has to it. It's a feel approach. And I agree with Brandel. You know, I think he needs a kickstart. I think he got a body blow big time at the Masters to perform as badly as he did. I think, you know, he's not on the floor, but he's certainly against the ropes. And what we've seen from Rory McIlroy in his whole career, it's ups and it's downs. And he had an unbelievable up last year. I know he didn't win a major championship, championship, but he top tens in all the major championships. He went on and won 4 times, as well as taking down Scotty Scheffler to win the FedEx last year. He had a phenomenal year. Now he's on a little bit of a lull at the moment. I'm just hoping there's not going to be an overreaction, as the statistics shows right there. It's not just that he's lost his game. He's still 4th in tee to green there. You know, the putting is off, but you know what it's like. He's an inspirational player. He can wake up in the morning, something can ignite him, and I think something does need to ignite him, because at the moment I just see the body language and the energy levels are down.
I just want to revisit your point about live golf. Now, he was expansive in that interview you just saw with Kira Kay, but when he met with the press at large this afternoon, he was asked by Alan Shipnuck about live golf, and Rory was short, terse to say the least. Check this out.
Rory, we're coming up on the 1-year anniversary of the first live golf tournament. If you could look into your crystal ball, maybe say 3 years from now, where do you think the professional game will be?
I don't have a crystal ball.
Don't want to speculate?
No.
Right. Like 10?
Rory, you said after the Masters that you needed that break that you took. Having done so, has that sort of re-energised you? Did you think that was, well, obviously it was a good idea, but do you think that's going to work in your favour this week, hopefully?
I don't know. I needed it at the time. Whether it works this week or not remains to be seen.
You mentioned earlier about not having a crystal ball. Obviously, we all ask you a lot of questions about live, and you've spoken yourself recently about the burden of that. Is it going to be a conscious thing for you going forward to try and sidestep that narrative?
Yeah.
There was a ruthlessness about the way you were that final day. Are you still that way?
Yeah, I mean, again, I find being that way pretty exhausting in life in general, you know, to be that ruthless and that, you know, and that, it's not as if I can't get into that mode, but I don't feel like I need to be that way to be successful on the golf course.
You know, Paul, because he's so good with the press, because he's been so willing in a way that I don't think any other player is asked to do, he's constantly expounding on the state of the tour, the state of his game, the state of his mind. I mean, and it feels like, you know, Rory said, oh, I need to put some roadblocks up on this. Where do you see this going? What would that tell you there?
Well, I mean, he's chairman of the players. Let's start with that. That's the role that he's been voted into by his peers. He sits on the board. And what a time to be sitting on the board as chairman of the players. I mean, a lot of players have sat in that position, but none have had to deal with the issues that have gone on the last 12 months. So he's taken on a lot of those single-handedly. I think he's taken a lot of bullets. I think the atmosphere around live has turned particularly toxic over the last 3 or 4 or 5 months. I think he's felt that. He likes to be popular. I don't think his peers have stood up and really supported him, certainly not publicly anyway. I think that has hurt. And he's right to withdraw and say, you know what, I've done my bit, let's stand back now and I'm going to look after Rory a bit. So if that's what he's doing, good luck to him. I don't think he should reverse back into this intensity, an insular way of, you know, not engaging at all with the media, because that's not Rory. That's not when he's at his best. He's at his best when he's fun, he's inspired, and he's got an aspiration about where he's going to, and excited, and a lot of emotion, and his heart is on fire about what he's trying to chase down. And I think a lot of the toxicity, particularly in the last 2 or 3 months, which has raised up quite a few levels, I think has really affected him. And I think he said, okay, enough is enough now. I'm going to withdraw. Let somebody else take the bullets for me. I'm going to focus on my golf. And if that's what he's doing, good luck to him.
How about this idea that he might play better with lower expectations?
I don't know about that. Rory McIlroy comes into every single tournament with expectations through the roof. I think, you know, what we're seeing with him is, I think he's on, as I say, he's on the ropes at the moment. I think emotionally he's on the ropes. I think he's had a body blow, certainly, with the Masters performance, you know, where he really felt like he was going to put in a huge performance. We all did too. So many people fancied him to win that Masters, and not alone did he not perform well, he performed terribly. And I think that was a huge body blow for him. He has come back from situations like this in the past, We've seen him shoot, what, 80, 81 at his home Open Championship up in Royal Portrush and bounce back to win the FedEx that year. We saw him the disappointment of not winning a major and being taken down by Cameron Smith last year, and then going, you know, lighting fire for the next 2 or 3 months and going on to win the FedEx. So I think he'll bounce back. I think at this moment in time, it's a little bit of a lull, and I just hope that it's not an overreaction and he goes into a kind of a deep lull like we've seen in the past before he eventually comes out. And I hope he sees it for what it is, which is a little bit of inspiration, a little bit of better putting, and just wait for, you know, the golfing gods to turn his way again. But there's been a lot on his plate. Let's say that and put that out there. There's a lot on his plate. Certainly as chairman, what a time to be chairman. And I agree with Brandel. You know, I think somebody needed to stand up on behalf of the players, and he did. And I feel, you know, a little bit protective of Rory. Obviously, I know him well, but I also feel disappointment that I haven't heard a lot of players coming out and saying, you know what, Rory's been terrific, the tour is in a better place, and we're all looking forward to going forward, because Rory's taken all the bullets here. I haven't seen a lot of other players standing up and taking the bullets that Rory has. A lot of them have ducked the issue and haven't really got involved and come out and supported the tour that they play on, where they're playing for a whole lot more money, and appreciative of what's gone on. I don't see a lot of appreciation going on. I see a lot of them kind of ducking the issue and letting Rory stand up there and take the bullets, particularly in this toxic atmosphere.
And it's not an entirely unique situation. If you remember when the PGA Tour split from the PGA of America, that was 1968. You know, the great Jack Nicklaus, who just rattled off major after major, did not win a major championship in 1968, did not win a major championship in 1969. So it's easy to see where the distractions would fall. The things that people love about Rory, that we love about Rory, is that he's such a compelling figure because of his talent, but also because of his curiosity. And that curiosity leads to him being informed. Well, when you're one of the most well-informed and articulate people in the game of golf, you ascend to a place of great responsibility. And, you know, when you're that well-informed and you're that curious and you're that articulate, people want to hear your voice. Now, it comes a line. It's a tug-of-war. It's like, well, do I take care of the responsibility that my leadership role has ascended me to, or do I take care of my destiny, which my talent has ascended me to? This is a tough situation to be in. We should all have such problems. When you're somebody of Rory's character and talent, you assume great responsibility. Now, I have no doubt that he's going to work his way through this and carry on winning majors at some point in his career. And he may end with 6, he may end with 8, he may get to 10, who knows? But he's got plenty of time and plenty of talent. The point is to be patient. When I hear him talk about expectations, what I'm thinking of is his own expectations of perfection. He gets frustrated pretty quickly in golf tournaments sometimes. His shoulders will slump. It's like, be easy on yourself. At the end of the week, you're going to be one of the leaders in strokes gained off the tee. At the end of the week, you're going to be one of the leaders in strokes gained approach. And week in and week out, this year, he hasn't putted particularly well. But the ebb and flow of the game has me believing that it'll turn around at some point.
All right, Rory is out at 8:11 a.m. Eastern time. It's a good 3-ball. It is Justin Thomas and Colin Morikawa. They are all PGA champions. Rory and JT have each won it twice. You say this about just any player in the field. He needs to dominate. He's capable. Dominate with that driver. Plenty of eyes on Rory McIlroy here at Oak Hill.